Okay, so ready to dive into some pretty potentially game-changing news in the world of diabetes treatment.
Absolutely.
You know how managing diabetes can be like a real roller coaster?
Yeah.
But what if we told you that GATC Health Corp is making some serious waves
Hmm.
with the stem cell therapy that might just change the game?
Yeah, we're talking about the possibility of not just managing diabetes,
Right.
but actually targeting the root of the problem.
And that's a big deal. We're
Huge.
going deep on this one, using a review article from the American Journal of Biomedical Science and Research as our guide.
Okay.
And we're talking about over 537 million adults worldwide dealing with this condition.
Wow.
So any breakthrough is big news.
Yeah, and this isn't just about tweaking existing treatments.
Right.
This is about leveraging the power of stem cells,
Okay.
specifically the patient's own, to potentially revolutionize how we approach diabetes care.
So no more worries about rejection.
Exactly.
That's a big win right there.
Huge win.
But I have to admit, the science behind all this is a bit of a mystery to me.
Well, let's break it down. It's
Come on.
actually quite elegant.
Okay.
They collect stem cells from the patient's bone marrow.
Okay.
We're talking about bone marrow-derived mononuclear cells, or BMMNCs,
BMMNCs, got it.
process them, and then reintroduce them back into the patient.
So they take your own cells, give them a tune-up,
Exactly.
and send them back in to do their thing.
Yep.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
But how do they make sure those stem cells actually turn into the cells needed to combat diabetes?
That's where it gets fascinating.
Okay.
These BMMNCs have the potential to become many different cell types. With precise guidance, researchers can nudge them towards becoming the insulin-producing beta cells that are essential for regulating blood sugar.
So it's like cellular reprogramming,
Exactly.
turning these blank slate cells into the specific type needed to address the diabetes.
You got it.
Wow.
And GATC is taking it a step further with their AI platform called MAP. It's like having a super smart assistant that helps select the most suitable candidates for the therapy and monitors their progress every step of the way.
Hold on. AI is involved too.
It is.
That adds a whole other layer of complexity.
It does.
Okay.
MA analyzes tons of data to personalize the treatment plan. This helps ensure the best possible outcome for each patient.
Okay, so we've got the patient's own cells, some clever cellular manipulation, and AI guiding the process.
All working together.
It's a lot to unpack. But what does all this mean in terms of actual results?
Well, the review article points to some promising findings from initial clinical trials.
Okay.
We're talking about improvements in blood sugar control, insulin production, and overall management of the disease.
Wow.
In some cases, patients have even been able to reduce their reliance on medication.
That's a pretty big deal,
It is.
especially for those who've been struggling with the daily grind of managing their diabetes.
Absolutely.
But are these improvements short-lived, or do they actually stick around?
That's the exciting part.
Okay.
Some studies are showing benefits lasting up to 36 months post-treatment.
Wow.
This suggests that we're not just talking about a temporary fix, but potentially a long-term solution.
3 years. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And you said this could work for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
It's showing promise for both types,
Wow.
and even for managing some of those tricky diabetes-related complications. It's like a multi-pronged approach to tackling the disease.
All this sounds incredibly promising, but I'm curious to get your expert take on it all.
Sure.
Where does this research stand in the broader landscape of diabetes treatment? Is this truly as groundbreaking as it seems?
These findings are definitely significant. We may be witnessing a paradigm shift in how we treat diabetes, moving away from just managing symptoms to actually addressing the underlying cause.
We're talking about potentially transforming the lives of millions of people.
Absolutely.
What kind of impact could this have on the world of diabetes care if this therapy proves successful?
The implications are vast.
Okay.
Think about healthcare systems struggling with the costs of diabetes management, pharmaceutical companies focusing on symptom control,
Right.
and most importantly, individuals living with the daily burden of this disease.
Yeah.
This therapy could shake things up in a big way.
It's a lot to process, but this is all based on early research, right?
It is early.
What are the next steps?
Right.
What needs to happen before this becomes a reality for people living with diabetes?
You're right.
Okay.
Larger clinical trials are crucial to confirm these initial findings
Okay.
and ensure long-term safety and efficacy.
Okay, so more research is key.
Absolutely.
Where else?
We also need to consider practicalities like cost and accessibility. If this is going to be a true game changer, it needs to be available to everyone who needs it,
Yeah,
not just a select few.
makes sense. Anything else?
Well, we need to address any potential challenges that might arise during the development process.
Okay.
There's always room for optimization and refinement.
Of course, no solution is ever perfect right out of the gate.
Right.
This all sounds incredibly complex,
Yeah.
but you've explained it so clearly.
Thanks.
Now I'm eager to dive deeper into the science behind all this stem cell magic.
Let's do it. All right, so ready to break down the science behind this stem cell therapy?
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
We keep throwing around the term stem cells, but what exactly are they, and why are they so important when it comes to treating something like diabetes?
Imagine stem cells as the ultimate multitaskers of the body.
Oh.
They have this unique ability to both self-renew, meaning they can create copies of themselves,
Okay.
and differentiate, meaning they can transform into specialized cells with specific jobs.
So they're like the blank canvases of the body, capable of becoming anything.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
It is.
Okay, now think about diabetes.
Okay.
The core problem lies with the pancreas.
Right.
Specifically those beta cells that produce insulin. In type 1 diabetes, these beta cells are attacked by the immune system.
Right.
And in type 2, they just can't keep up with demand, or the body stops responding to insulin properly. Right. So in both types, the body struggles to regulate blood sugar.
Yeah.
But how do stem cells fit into this picture?
That's where the magic happens.
Okay.
By introducing healthy stem cells into the body, the goal is to either replenish or replace those malfunctioning beta cells, essentially restoring the body's ability to produce insulin effectively.
So it's like hitting the reset button on the pancreas,
Yeah.
giving it a fresh supply of those insulin-producing cells.
Exactly.
But we were talking about using the patient's own stem cells, right?
Yes.
Where did those come from?
Remember those BMMNCs we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Those are the key players here.
Okay.
They're harvested from the patient's bone marrow, and they have the potential to be transformed into those much-needed beta cells.
Okay, so you're saying we can take these bone marrow cells
Right.
and turn them into pancreatic beta cells.
Yeah, how does that even work? Is it like a cellular makeover?
It's more like a carefully orchestrated cellular ballet.
Okay.
Researchers have figured out the right mix of growth factors and signals to guide these BMMNCs down the path to becoming insulin-producing beta cells.
So it's not as simple as injecting the stem cells and hoping for the best?
No,
There's a whole process of transforming them into the right kind of cells?
exactly. It's a sophisticated process that requires a deep understanding of how stem cells function
Oh, okay.
and what triggers their transformation.
Okay, now I'm picturing these newly trained beta cells ready to go.
Right.
How do they actually get into the pancreas and start doing their job?
It's surprisingly straightforward.
Okay.
The transformed cells are infused back into the patient usually through an IV, and they naturally migrate to the pancreas where they integrate with the existing tissue.
It's amazing to think that these tiny cells can find their way to exactly where they're needed and start producing insulin.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
This all sounds incredibly promising.
It is.
But I have to ask, what are the chances of this actually becoming a mainstream treatment?
Sure.
What needs to happen before this goes from the lab to the doctor's office?
You're right to be cautious.
Okay.
While the initial results are exciting, we need to see how this therapy performs in larger long-term studies.
Okay.
We need to confirm its effectiveness, safety, and figure out the ideal protocols for different types of diabetes.
So more research is crucial, but what about cost and accessibility?
Yeah, for sure.
That's a big factor in whether a treatment becomes widely available.
Absolutely. Developing and implementing this kind of therapy will require significant resources.
Right.
Figuring out how to make it affordable and accessible to everyone who needs it will be crucial.
It wouldn't be much of a breakthrough if only a select few could benefit.
Exactly.
So more research accessibility. What else should we be thinking about as this field moves forward?
Well, we need to be prepared for unexpected challenges.
Okay.
This is a new frontier, and there will likely be hurdles we haven't even anticipated yet.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about the science and the practicalities.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that behind all the research and technical details are real people whose lives are deeply affected by this disease.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear from someone who's actually living with diabetes and get their perspective on all this.
You're absolutely right. The human side of this story is crucial.
Yeah.
And as luck would have it, we have someone very special joining us today.
Really?
Let me introduce you to Sarah.
Hey.
She's been living with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years and has graciously agreed to share her story with us.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been unpacking the science behind this revolutionary stem cell therapy for diabetes.
Right.
And now we have the privilege of hearing from someone who knows firsthand what it's like to live with this condition.
Absolutely.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you sharing your story.
Of course.
Sarah, we've been discussing this new stem cell therapy that could potentially change the way we treat diabetes.
Yeah, it sounds pretty amazing.
But before we dive into that, we'd love to hear about your journey with diabetes.
Okay.
Can you tell us a bit about what it's been like managing this condition for over 20 years?
Well, it's been quite a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at a young age was definitely a life-changing experience. Like having this constant companion that you always have to consider no matter what you're doing.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
It's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the day-to-day realities of living with diabetes? What are some of the biggest challenges you faced?
The biggest thing is the constant monitoring and management.
Okay.
You know, it's all about checking blood sugar levels,
Mm-hmm.
calculating insulin doses, and making sure you're eating the right things at the right times.
Right.
It can be exhausting, both physically and mentally.
You mentioned insulin. Can you talk about your experiences with traditional diabetes treatments like insulin injections?
Sure.
What's been your experience with them?
Insulin is a lifesaver. There's no doubt about that.
But it's not a perfect solution.
Right.
It's a lot of trial and error to find the right dosage and timing.
Yeah.
And even then, things can fluctuate. Plus, there's always the risk of complications like hypos and hypers.
It sounds like a constant balancing act.
It is.
Given all these challenges, what are your thoughts on this new stem cell therapy?
Well,
What kind of hope does it offer you?
honestly, it's incredibly exciting.
Okay.
The idea of potentially being free from the constant need for insulin injections and blood sugar monitoring is mind-blowing.
Wow.
It would be life-changing. Of course, I'm also cautious.
Right.
It's still early days,
Sure.
but the potential is there.
Yeah.
And that's enough to give me hope.
We've been talking about the potential impact of this therapy on healthcare systems and the pharmaceutical industry. But for you, Sarah, what would be the biggest personal impact if this treatment became widely available?
I think the biggest thing for me would be the freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom from the constant worry, the needles, the restrictions.
It would be amazing to just live my life without diabetes constantly dictating my choices. It would open up so many possibilities.
That's incredibly powerful, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us.
You're welcome.
It really helps put all this scientific progress into a human context.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Your story is a reminder that behind every medical breakthrough are real people who stand to benefit in profound ways.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
the ripple effect. If this stem cell therapy proves successful, what kind of impact could it have on the future of medicine?
This could be a watershed moment, not just for diabetes, but
Right.
for other conditions where cell damage or loss is a factor. We're talking about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, spinal cord injuries, heart disease. The possibilities are vast.
It's like we're on the verge of a regenerative medicine revolution.
I think so.
The idea of repairing and regenerating damaged tissues and organs is incredibly exciting.
It's a whole new world.
But we have to remember that with any groundbreaking advancement comes responsibility.
Absolutely.
We need to ensure equitable access,
Yes.
carefully consider ethical implications, and proceed with cautious optimism.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the science, the potential, the challenges, and most importantly, the human impact of this groundbreaking stem cell therapy. Sarah, thank you again for sharing your story with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep believing in the power of science to change the world for the better.